Okay, here we go. Last chapter of To Kill a Mockingbird, chapter 31, page 371. When Boo Radley shuffled to his feet, light from the living room windows glistened on his forehead. Every move he made was uncertain, as if he weren't sure his hands and feet could make proper contact with the things that he touched. He coughed his dreadful railing cough and was so shaken that he had to sit down again. His hands searched for his hip pocket, and he pulled out a handkerchief. He coughed into it, and then he wiped his forehead. Having been so accustomed to his absence, I found it incredible that he'd been sitting beside me all of this time, present. He had not made a sound. Once more, he got to his feet. He turned to me and nodded toward the front door. "You'd like to say good night to Jem, wouldn't you, Mr. Arthur?" "Come right in." I led him down the hall. Aunt Alexandra was sitting by Jem's bed. "Come in, Arthur," she said. "He's still asleep. Dr. Reynolds gave him a heavy sedative. Jane Louise, is your father in the living room?" "Yes, ma'am, I think so." "Well, I'll just go speak to him a minute. Dr. Reynolds left some—" and her voice trailed away. Boo had drifted to a corner of the room, where he stood with his chin up, peering from a distance at Jem. I took him by the hand, a hand surprisingly warm for its whiteness. I tugged him a little, and he allowed me to lead him to Jem's bed. Dr. Reynolds had made a tent-like arrangement over Jem's arm to keep the cover off, I guess, and Boo leaned forward and looked it over. An expression of timid curiosity was on his face, as though he had never seen a boy before. His mouth was slightly open, and he looked at Jem from head to foot. Boo's hand came up, but he let it drop to his side. "You can pet him, Mr. Arthur. He's asleep. You couldn't if he was awake, though. He wouldn't let you." I found myself explaining. "Go ahead." Boo's hand hovered over Jem's head. "Go on, sir. He's asleep." His hand came down lightly on Jem's hair. Okay, so a lot of times when I read this, kids think that's, like, creepy to, like, pet him. But you have to remember that Boo is, like, the age of a father for these kids. And so just like Atticus did earlier when he was massaging Jem's hair when he was proud of him in the mob scene, that's how Boo is with Jem. Like, he's just concerned because this little boy that he cares about, like a child, like a son, just got hurt really bad, and he just wants to, like, kind of pet him like that everything's okay. I was beginning to learn his body English. His hand tightened on mine, and he indicated that he wanted to leave. I led him to the front porch where his uneasy steps halted. He was still holding my hand, and he gave no sign of letting me go. "Will you take me home?" He almost whispered it, in the voice of a child afraid of the dark. I put my foot on the top step and stopped. I would lead him through our house, but I would never lead him home. "Mr. Arthur, bend your arm down here. Yep, like that. That's right, sir." And I slipped my hand into the crook of his arm. He had to stoop a little to accommodate me, but if Miss Stephanie Crawford was watching from her upstairs window, she would see Arthur Bradley escorting me down the sidewalk, as any gentleman would do. So at this moment, Scout is, like, walking like this with Arthur because she wants, if anybody's watching, for them to see that he's, like, a normal guy. She doesn't want him to seem creepy, right? Like this 40-year-old man being dragged down the street by a little girl. We came to the street light on the corner, and I wondered how many times Dill had stood there hugging the fat pole, watching, waiting, and hoping. I wondered how many times Jem and I had made this journey. But I entered the Radley front gate for the second time in my life. Boo and I walked up the steps to the porch. His fingers found the front doorknob. He gently released my hand, opened the door, went inside, and shut the door behind him. And I never saw him again. Neighbors bring food with death and flowers with sickness, and little things in between. Boo was our neighbor. He gave us 2 soap dolls, a broken watch and chain, a pair of good luck pennies, and our lives. But neighbors give in return. We never put back into the tree what we took out of it. We had given him nothing, and it made me sad. I turned to go home. Street lights winked down the street all the way to town. I'd never seen our neighborhood from this angle. There was Miss Maudie's, Miss Stephanie's, there was our house. I could see the porch swing. Miss Rachel's house was beyond us, plainly visible. I could even see Mrs. Du Bois. I looked behind me. To the left of the brown door was a long shuttered window. I walked to it, stood in front of it, and turned around. In daylight, I thought, you could see to the post office corner. So this has always been a theme, right? To stand in somebody else's shoes, and she is looking at the street from Boo Radley's perspective by standing in front of his window. And now, normally, when I would read this, I would stop and have you guys tell me everything that she was reminiscing about over the last couple years. So she says, daylight. In my mind, the night faded. It was daytime and the neighborhood was busy. Miss Stephanie Crawford crossed the street to tell the latest to Miss Rachel. Miss Maudie bent over her azaleas. It was summertime, and 2 children scampered down the sidewalk toward a man approaching in the distance. The man waved, and the children raced each other to him. So that would be like her imagining Boo watching the kids race to meet their father when he comes home from work. It was still summertime, and the children came closer. A boy trudged down the sidewalk, dragging a fishing pole behind him. A man stood waiting with his hands on his hips. So that's when they got caught trying to get the note with the fishing pole. Summertime, and his children played in the front yard with their friend, enacting a strange little drama of their own invention. That's when they played the Boo Radley game. It was fall, and his children fought on the sidewalk in front of Mrs. Du Bois. The boy helped his sister to her feet, and they made their way home. Fall, and his children trotted to and fro around the corner, the day's woes and triumphs on their faces. They stopped at an oak tree, delighted, puzzled, apprehensive. So that's when they got into their Jem destroyed Mrs. Du Bois' bushes, and they got into trouble. And then the last one was when they found all the stuff in the tree. Winter, and his children shivered at the front gate, silhouetting against a blazing house. So that's when he put the blanket on Scout when Miss Maudie's house burnt down. Winter, and a man walked into the street, dropped his glasses, and shot a dog. That's the rabbit dog. Summer, and he watched his children's heart break. That's the trial. Autumn again, and Boo's children needed him. So that's what just happened when he saved the kids. Atticus was right. One time he said, you never really know a man until you stand in his shoes and walk around in them. Just standing on the Radley porch was enough. The street lights were fuzzy from the fine rain that was falling, and as I made my way home, I felt very old. When I looked at the tip of my nose, I could see fine misty beads, but looking cross-eyed made me dizzy, so I quit. And as I made my way home, I thought, what a thing to tell Jem tomorrow. He'd be so mad that he missed it, he wouldn't speak to me for days. And as I made my way home, I thought Jem and I would get grown, but there wasn't much else left for us to learn, except possibly algebra. I ran up to the steps and into the house. Aunt Alexandra had gone to bed, and Atticus's room was dark. I'd see if Jem might be reviving. Atticus was in Jem's room, sitting by his bed, and he was reading a book. Is Jem awake yet? Nope, sleeping peacefully, won't be awake until the morning. Oh, are you sitting up with him? Just for an hour or so. Go to bed, Scout. You've had a long day. Well, I think I'll stay with you for a while. Suit yourself, said Atticus. It must have been after midnight, and I was puzzled by his amiable acquiescence. He was shrewder than I, however. The moment I sat down, I began to feel sleepy. What you reading? I asked. Atticus turned the book over. I don't know, it's something of Jem's, called The Gray Ghost. I was suddenly awake. Why'd you pick that one? Honey, I don't know. I just picked it up. It's one of the few things I haven't read, he said pointedly. Ooh, read it out loud, please, Atticus. It's real scary. No, you've had enough scaring for a while. This is too... Atticus, I wasn't scared. He raised his eyebrows, and I protested. Leastways, not till I started telling Mr. Tate about it. And Jem wasn't scared. I asked him. He said he wasn't. Besides, nothing's real scary except in books. Atticus opened his mouth to say something, but shut it again. He took his thumb from the middle of the book and turned back to the first page. I moved over and leaned my head against his knee. The Gray Ghost by Secretary Hawkins, Chapter 1. I willed myself to stay awake, but the rain was so soft, and the room was so warm, and his voice was so deep, and his knee was so snug, that I slept. Seconds later, it seemed, his shoe was gently nudging my ribs. He lifted me to my feet and walked me to my room. I heard every word you said, I muttered. I wasn't asleep at all. It's about a ship, and three-fingered Fred, and Stoner's boy. He unhooked my overalls, leaned me against him, and pulled them off. He held me up with one hand and reached for my pajamas with the other. Yeah, and they all thought it was Stoner's boy messing up their clubhouse and throwing ink all over it. He guided me to the bed and sat me down. He lifted my legs and put me under the covers. And they chased him, and they could never catch him, because they didn't know what he looked like. And Atticus, when they finally saw him, why, he hadn't done any of those things. Atticus, he was real nice. My hands were under my chin, pulling up the covers and tucking it around me. Most people are, Scout, when you finally see them. He turned out the light and went into Jem's room. He would be there all night, and he would be there when Jem waked up in the morning. If any of you caught, the gray ghost story is very similar to the Boo Radley story, right? Where they think that he's causing all the trouble, and they don't know what he looks like, but when they finally meet him, he's actually a pretty cool person. Just like Boo Radley. All right, that is it. Goodbye.